Fantastic Friday Live lined up for you. This is your chance to get immediate help and support on some of the common things that so many grads struggle with in their journey. Before I get started, I'm just going to check the stream, make sure everything is going as it should, and it looks very good. We are going to roll up our sleeves and have a bit of fun today. We have Joanne, one of the students who's been working very hard on her systematic review, now has a complete draft manuscript. We're going to go through that together, and I'm going to give you some of the secret tips that I've used to edit manuscripts really effectively, some things that you may not have done before or knew about. So just some of those shortcuts that I've learned from 20 years of writing and publishing papers. So I'm going to share those with you, and it's also going to give you some concrete suggestions and things to look out for so you don't make some of the mistakes that I've spotted in Joanne's paper in your own paper. I find a lot of students say it's just really helpful to see that kind of practical insight of how a professor goes through and edits a paper, where sometimes if you send your paper to your professor, you get things back and track changes, but you don't really know why that's there. So we're going to do that. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I also have on the stream here with us Philip. Philip, hey, good to see you, Philip. Good to have you join.
Nice to be here.
Hey, awesome. Philip, really good to have you. Philip is doing a fantastic review on the structural causes and interventions that can help prevent burnout in healthcare workers. And Philip has a background as a physician and is moving into public health. So, Philip, really excited to have you join us today. I'm going to come back to you in a second.
Nice to be here. It's okay.
Awesome.
Come and go.
Cool. I'll come back to you. And then we also have Conrad, who has had some struggles with keywords. And Conrad was having some connection issues. So I'm going to definitely cover a mini training that's going to help you if you feel like you're doing your search and you're just getting a whole bunch of irrelevant articles. I'm going to take you back through some of the steps that might help diagnose where the bottleneck is and just outline what the good flow should be. And we have other people joining directly in the studio. You'll find that link inside the Facebook group, which, let me remind you, if you haven't already, do join our Facebook group. You're going to find a lot of valuable training and support with over 30 hours of masterclasses on things like presenting, writing with confidence, reading, analyzing quantitative data, and of course, our step-by-step systematic review challenge that takes you start to finish to publishing your first paper. And it is no exaggeration that this can take you from zero to publishing in under 8 weeks. You'll see several examples of students who have done it. It is a challenge, but it can be done, and we have the support and guidance to help you get there. So with that, I'm just going to check the stream one more time and make sure this is running well. And it looks like we are, yeah, looks like we're good. So I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to go ahead and pull up Joanne's paper. And Philip, I'm actually going to bring you on for this because I want to see your thoughts, and I'm going to ask you too your feedback and looking things, because if they're not clear to you, then they're probably not going to be clear to some other intelligent peer reviewers. One of the aspirations.
Can I add something though?
Yeah.
Quick, before I forget. There's a lot of really good trainings, etc. on the group, and even with applications, like Professor Stuckler goes the distance to help the students with everything, even applications or for fellowships, etc. So, like, I highly encourage going through them. They're very informative.
Oh, thanks, Philip. By the way, I haven't paid Philip to say anything here, but
no. Yes, I'm doing it because I found them very useful myself.
Glad you're getting value out of it. You do mention something. I'm very selective about students who I work with, but I really like working with students who are hardworking and have the potential to grow and really benefit from it. And with those, do provide complete support, and that does include helping students with their applications to programs at times. But I want to help students who are really serious about trying to make a difference with their work and make a difference in the world. And Philip, you're one of them. So I'm really happy that we can work together. Okay, let me share, and Joanne's another one of them. So let me share the screen and get this up and running. So 2 seconds. Excited to share this with you. Okay, so here we go. You can see my messy desktop. I've been recording some different YouTube videos and some of the common things that you've shared this week you've been struggling with. Okay, so here we've got Joanne's paper, and she's got some questions and comments here. So let's take this through. And whenever looking at any paper, you first really want to get a macro sense of what the paper's saying, what it's about, and I'm going to do mainly, I don't have time to do detailed line edits, but I want to make sure that the main components are in place. So here we go. So systematic review of burnout, quality of life of early childhood educators. So one of the things I want you to remember is I want you to have your Pico linking sentence. You'll remember this from before when you established your Pico. That's going to help you in your title. This doesn't really tell me what kind of relationship I'm looking at. I'm missing a key verb in this title. So I think what I want this to be is something more like, say, determinants of burnout and quality of life among, that just decided to read, we don't want that. Word sometimes gets quirky on you. Among early childhood educators, systematic review of whatever it is. Systematic review, let's just leave it like that, but at least determinants gives us something. Something that immediately jumps out at me looking at this is, I'm curious about, and I can already foreshadow needs to be explained, is why burnout and quality of life. And already Joanne's popped the question for me, how interchangeable quality of life be used for well-being and writing. I don't think quality of life and well-being are interchangeable, but I'm not an expert on that. Maybe that's a convention in the field, but I don't think so. So I think there's something here that's telling me there's a little bit of a disconnect here in these two. So we'll look at that. Again, you want to format this already. So put your abstract on the next page and create a title page. We have really good video on how to set up your manuscript for submission. If you're interested in that, let me know and I'll share that with you. Usually you don't want this to be italicized, so let's get rid of that. And the abstract should be a mini synopsis of the paper. And Philip, by the way, you still with me?
Yes, I'm here. I'm here.
Good.
I got distracted for 1 second.
So let's take a look at the abstract together and see if this looks clear. By the way, any of you watching and have questions about this editing process, do let me know. So the abstract really should draw on your readers and be a mini synopsis of why you did what you did, why is it important, what you did, and what you found. This is an example of unstructured abstract. Sometimes you'll have structured abstract that you need to do background, methods, results, conclusions, and you might have to interchange them. Several of my students have gone through that. So these two things need to kind of set up what the issue is and what's the gap, and then what you did and what you found. So we'll come back to that, but I don't want to get too detailed. Let's just keep going through the paper. And here I can see an introduction. So we'll look at the introduction methods. We'll just do kind of a very quick litmus test on the health of this article. So there's some big errors already that I see kind of in the formatting. These figures need to come out and go to the end of the document. So that's a common way to structure. So just leave here, say, for example, figure 2 about here. Do not, and this is kind of a beginner mistake I often see, these figures need to go to the very end of the paper to enable you to better read your text. I'm not going to waste our time doing that here, but I'll just show you a quick example. So get the formatting right, because I understand Joanne wants to submit this soon, and these figures and tables need to come to the end of the manuscript. Sometimes when submitting, you may need to upload the figures and tables separately. So make sure you have that available. So here, I'm just going to put here figures as a placeholder and drop that there. Okay. And then you need to take some steps to get the figures up to publishable quality. This also needs to be line spaced at 1.5 or 2, depending on the journal form, but not single spaced. So that's also, I'm just going to put a comment. So what you need to do is consult the style guide. So create a list of potential journals to submit to. Following the training we did last, consult the style guide for spacing and section headings. It's going to vary across journals. You need to make sure that's right. And also the word limits for the abstract. So let me come back and take a look at the abstract now. So you definitely want to, I'm going to put a comment on the introduction to fix the figures. Move figures and tables to end of the manuscript. Okay. And there's I can already spot there's some with this major major glitches with his introduction. So let's take this step at a time. Okay, so the abstract. And you have to read it. So obviously, let's look at this. Key text of early childhood education is quality interactions are of emotionally well-present responsible young children. There are current studies on teachers' burnout, what kinds of studies, but none is on early childhood educators. That seems very surprising. I don't think that's what you want to say. This systematic review sets out to plug the gap in teachers' burnout. It's still not really clear for me. Philip, is this clear to you what the gap is here?
I'm also trying to understand it, and maybe they did a study with another kind of test, and it's not the standard test that we're supposed to use, like the
Yeah.
like,
Yeah, I don't see this as exactly. So it's not wholly clear, and there's some redundancy. So this abstract needs to say what the issue. What is the issue that this paper? Why are you having this conversation now? And I think your concern is that, well, maybe that these early childhood educators aren't able to perform well because they're not emotionally well present and responsive to young children because they're getting burnt out. I mean, your title is about burnout, but in quality of life, but I don't see anything about burnout here. So I think what you want to say is maybe early. Well, the format has just gone a little bit haywire. Hang on, let me fix that again. So I think you want to say something to the effect of how early childhood educators might have particular risks that put them at risk of burnout. Early childhood educators face a high risk of burnout. Several systematic, and I think you could just say, to our knowledge, there has yet to be a systematic review on the causes of. And I don't really know from the way you've set this up. What are you wanting to look at about burnout? Your title doesn't really make that clear at all. Is it a determinant? So you want to look at interventions that can improve burnout? You really want to make sure your readers know what they're going to see. So there's yet to be systematic review on the. I'm just making this up because I don't really know yet. I'd have to look at the paper more on the causes or on how to prevent burnout among early childhood educators. So here we performed and this is making it confusing. You said you did a systematic review and then a thematic analysis. Systematic review of 40. Here we perform a systematic review of articles. You might want to mention your databases here of peer-reviewed articles. And let's go ahead and list the number. 40 peer-reviewed articles. And this is strange. This is a very quirky geographic selection. Why? It's unclear if this was a restriction. Did you restrict to this geography? It's just really, it's just tricky to follow. What
it's
exactly?
one of the things I was gonna ask. In fact, like
Yeah.
in the title, if you include where, I don't know if it's.
Yeah, so I don't know. You remember you have your Pico. Was this a restriction you made, or was this something that just came out of the articles that were available? That's really not clear. So here we perform a systematic review of peer-reviewed articles covering the years 1925 to 2021. And what did you find? This doesn't really say we found X. Doesn't really say what you found. So this is kind of a very superficial description of what you found. So this still doesn't. The study revealed the way emotional exhaustion contributes to burnout. That doesn't really help, right? That doesn't tell your readers much information. It kind of says that okay, there were some interesting things here about this, but this is way too vague for the abstract. Is there any implications for policy here that you can suggest? For example, maybe what you found is how many studies? Maybe 12 studies found that emotional exhaustion is the main risk factor for burnout, and say, future research needs to better understand how to prevent burnout in early career educators or something. At least you're pointing to an agenda for future research. But what this abstract is essentially doing is saying, well, we did some cool stuff, read the paper. And that's just not good enough. So I can't, this is a little hard for me to edit because I need to go through now and fish out of the paper the main findings to put into the abstract. So the abstract should really read like the highlight reel. So I'm going to put this here, the macro comments. So the main highlights of your study need to be in here. You've just looked at 40 articles on burnout in early childhood educators. What did you find? I said I identified factors that cause risk of burnout. It's just really unclear. Okay, Philip, anything to add from your experience? I know you've read a lot of things.
Thinking, but I think anything from prior to 1995, like if there's anything that's been done and why it's 1995 onwards.
Yeah,
but I think that gets included later on, I think.
Yeah, so these details are very important, but exactly, why 1995? This is it seems like a random cutoff. Make sure this is justified somewhere. So glad you brought that up, Philip. Okay, let's keep going. So the introduction. So I want to come back and step through for a second into the introduction. So I've covered this before, but the first paragraph means to answer, why are we having this conversation now? Why is this so important? And why, and especially now? So I think this introduction, this first paragraph needs to say something about early childhood educators are at a high risk of burnout, and if it's not addressed as burnout, actually harms kids. Not harms the teachers, harms the kids. It's costly for schools. It's really bad, right? So this paragraph needs to say we have a bad situation. This is just saying we need to explore the factors because it's linked to the ability to teach and care for children. You'd be much more assertive in making this point. It's not just linked. I mean, it sounds like your evidence is that you said before, early childhood educators are critical to children's educational outcomes, and when they're burnt out, then the children don't succeed. So this needs to say that. And then you've said there are various tools to measure burnout. So this here, you need to describe. Okay, so this is good. So then once you explain why this is important, so this paragraph, first paragraph, I suggest here, I'm just going to put an edit here, explain what the current issue is. That is that early childhood educators are at high risk of burnout, and this can harm children. Okay. Then I don't understand. This just says there are various tools to measure burnout. But how's that building up your argument for systematic review? You need to start getting to your introduction. You want to get to what the gap is. So why we're having this conversation now, we're really concerned about the early childhood educators. And now we need to say, well, burnout has been studied in many, many different ways across settings and given us mixed results that we don't have a lot of clarity on what the causes are. But we need to get that to get to your systematic review. This is just, this outline doesn't make sense.
Maybe like she can move it to a later stage and she just mentions which one they found the best one that's most if it's like in a clinical sense, the ones that had the best prognosis in a sense. Like I don't know if she can do it like that.
So I think that makes a lot of sense, Philip. Exactly. So you might want to make a judgment later on about the different tools used to measure burnout in your study, but this isn't clear why this has to do in the introduction. You look here, this here, it doesn't really get into burnout. You're just going straight into measurement. So the outline has gone a little bit off. So the second thing you need to say is, we need a paragraph on what we know and don't know about burnout in early childhood educators. And you need to really try to say, what is the gap? You try to get to what is the gap in knowledge. And this just isn't getting there at the moment. Some of this material is good. So this is good. Psychological well-being of educators. So there's none on early childhood educators. So it looks like she's drawing a distinction here that they've looked at educators generally, but not early childhood educators. So, but this is still very vague. Research has explored psychological well-being and their efficacy. This sentence doesn't make sense. You mean interventions, the efficacy of interventions? So be careful about throwing in jargon like efficacy if you don't have a full grasp of what it really means. And this is lumped in. See here, this systematic review now aims to plug the gap. That's a separate paragraph. Remember, each paragraph 1 point. So that's another highlight I want to make here. So this needs some radical surgery to the outline. So I'm going to say, remake your outline. You have most of the content here, but the outline is like taking the readers. It's like going. It's like you're trying to go to London from, but you're stopping in Singapore, and then you're going down to Sydney, and then you're going to Berlin, and now you're going to Beijing, and you're kind of going all over the place. We need to go in a straight line to the point. So remake your outline to be more linear, and avoid unnecessary jargon because some of this is not being used accurately, and that's definitely going to jump out of at your reviewers. Don't try to use fancy jargon to make it seem like you know what you're talking about. It's just not necessary in most cases. It's always better to err on the side of being simple. This is good. Oh, and the 1 paragraph rule: 1 point in 1 paragraph. Each paragraph makes 1 point, and make that point very clear as the topic sentence. So that's just very important, and that's going to help. So I'm just going to do a little bit of surgery here. So this should be up here. So some of the issues that are why are we having this conversation now in Australia? 1/3 of early quality will remain in the will leave. So this is an important point. So let me just see if I can fix this. Early childhood educators have the highest. I don't know if you can say this, but this helps make the point. Highest risk of burnout of all teachers, of all school teachers. This left unaddressed. This burnout can be extremely damaging for children's educational performance, as well as creates considerable cost to educational systems. And here's your example of Australia to make that point. In Australia, it is estimated that 1/3 of qualified educators will leave within will leave within 4 years. This is still a little unclear. I think will leave the profession, and why is it? You need to kind of finish that. Is that bad? It's kind of hard to know if that's a bad number. You just need to clarify it. Will leave the teaching profession within 4 years. Considerable research has been done to try to prevent burnout in teachers. And then you had something about an increasing trend, right, as shown in figure 3. As shown in figure 3, there has been an and why is this figure 3? It should be figure 1 at this point. Exponential rise in studies of burnout. And then you need to say, but none, and then your gap applies to early childhood educators. You need to get to the gap. So let me get rid of this here, and the font's gone a little funky. There's something in your document, by the way, Joanne, that's gone a little funky. So you can see I'm starting to realign this to deal with this stuff. By the way, guys, another rookie error. If you're going to have a figure, make sure your figures are numbered properly. So here we go. So this is going to set the tone a little bit better for what's going on. So let me delete this off. And here we go. We've got some nice citations here. But you see, this is very vague. It just says there's research on psychological well-being of educators and efficacy. The sentence itself doesn't make any sense. Let's put this here. I do like the figure showing that there's definitely all this rise here, but none applies to early childhood educators. That seems a little strange because you're going to do a systematic review of the research on early childhood educators. So there's research there. So this still hasn't really articulated what the gap is yet for me. And then I still don't understand where this fits. And now you seem to got a framework. But what's also a little odd is you kind of said in the introduction this importance of emotional exhaustion, and then that's kind of your main conclusion later. So you really got to think through. This isn't clear at all what the gap is. It seems like you're trying to make an argument that's been studied in teachers overall, but not really the highest risk group of early childhood educators, or maybe no systematic review has been done. It's unfortunate. I know, Joanne, you're in Australia, that you can't join us today on the call, but do have a look at this and try to patch this up. This doesn't. This doesn't really belong here. This moves somewhere else. But yeah, I mean, I think you've got a lot of the content there and you know what to say, but this needs considerable reworking. One other thing I'd recommend you to do is in looking at an introduction, you remember you just identified a nearest neighbor paper to yours. So use your nearest neighbor paper as a guide for your introduction. That can also be a really helpful tip. Look how they structured their argument. You probably see these common threads. Why are we having this conversation now? What do we know? What do we don't know? And what's the gap? Here's how my study is going to fill that gap. It's usually just a very simple three-part structure. And other things like here I added a discussion about what methods are used to measure burnout. It's not really clear because your review is not about trying to figure out which of these methods is the best way to measure burnout. Maybe you want to say studies appear to have very different results using different measures of burnout. And so I'm doing a systematic review to figure out what's going on. It's really really unclear at the moment. So Joanne, I hope this is helpful to you. There's still a lot to be done here. So clean up the manuscript. I don't want to overload you with a whole bunch of different things to do. I see you registered for Sparrow. So clean up the formatting of the manuscript. The introduction is generally the hardest section to write. So it's not a problem that you've been struggling with it, but I think a lot of the things that might lead you to be going in circles is just the outline isn't fully clear at the moment. Okay, Philip, any thoughts on that before we move on?
A number of, like, two things. The diagram, I don't know if it was anything that it could have added, like, because I don't know if we didn't see the diagram, like, I don't know if it would have added, we could have commented on anything from that.
Which diagram, Philip?
Figure one, just figure one, the new figure one.
Let me pull that back up. I'm on a laptop at the moment, so I can't see you and the document at the same time.
It's okay.
So which one, Philip?
The figure one, from figure 3 to figure 1. So I think it's figure 3 for her.
Figure 3. I might have just deleted the figure. I don't even know where the figure is, which is another reason why your figures need to be at the end of the document. I don't know if I accidentally deleted. Maybe I moved it down. Here we go. Figure 3.
Oh, okay.
So this is strange. This is very strange.
So
maybe how did you get this figure? Where did this figure come from? And if you're setting this in the intro, it makes no sense. So it needs a caption. Did you search a particular database to get these numbers? Did this include early childhood educators? Because you seem to make a point that there's all these studies on teacher burnout, but not early childhood educators. So Yeah, this is really unclear to me. This is also labeled in a very
Yes.
quirky way.
Because of
These-
that's the gap between 2012 and
Usually on the x-axis, you want to label each bar. It looks like you've uploaded this as a different series for each bar, which is not what you want to do here. We'd have to go back in Excel and edit this to patch this up. But first, we need some more guidance on this.
And two things. One, maybe as to why maybe this is something that she would go through later in the paper, like why there was a gap, and if it's something that's burnout and anything that's being done, like what we were saying from our paper, like structural or individual, like what were the when she's commenting on the 40 different papers that she went through,
Yeah.
uh, in the introduction, like literally like group everything and
Yeah.
divide
So
them via that.
I like that. It looks like, and this is a challenge. So this summary table, the extraction, your extraction needs to have every element of your Pico, and this is missing. This is good. So I like that you got the method, you got the study design, you got the location, really good. You got the main findings, but where's the outcome? We need the outcome. That's really critical. Your outcome, you're looking at burnout. Well, how did they measure burnout? Or did they look at burnout? Did they measure it? And it gets kind of confusing here. Positive correlation between psychological capital and continuous commitment. Well, is continuous commitment burnout, or is that an element of burnout? I don't know. That needs to be. This is really unclear. So here, this is a nice commitment and fidelity of teachers decrease their chance of burnout. But what you want in your summary table is to be able to describe this study completely without having to go back to the study. And so that anybody like you or I, Philip, can see, what did this study do? Okay, so I kind of got there. Come in and all, they looked in the US, they did quantitative analysis cross-sectionally in 2013 of 53 teachers who apparently teach preschool special education. Great. But then what? Then I'm completely missing how burnout is being measured. Decrease their chance of burnout. So commitment and fidelity, and this is really unclearly described. What commitment? Did they use a scale to measure commitment? What's the construct here? Yeah, I think just in general, overall. So I'm going to put a macro comment too. Thanks for having me look back at this, Philip. Need to have an outcome column and be much more specific in describing the main findings, especially when identifying or describing the causes of burnout. Philip, you raised a point about structural and individual causes of burnout. I like that, because if they look at determinants, if you made a separate column on determinants, you could then later go and code, are these individual or structural? An individual thing being like maybe the person is depressed, right? That could be an individual determinant. A structural determinant could be that you're having to work too long shifts or too many hours, or maybe you have bad student teacher ratios. That's a structural determinant. That's not an individual characteristic of yours, but it's a feature of the entire system of the entire school you're working in. So that would be a really nice suggestion, Philip, and a really nice thing to code. I would have loved to have seen that, but I don't see that here. And some of this here is, I have no idea what this is. Pursuit of quality classroom. Not sure what this is. So I think, John, you've done a good job, but I think you've glossed over a few steps. And by glossing over those few steps, it kind of can build and accumulate and create more problems down the track. And so for some of you, I think rather than race ahead sometimes, make sure you've got each step done really, really well before progressing on to the next step, to avoid this kind of scenario where you might have to take steps back. And
What
some of the reporting,
what
I can see there's a challenge here in that the original data extraction is missing things. You're going to say something, Philip?
yeah, something you taught us before in previous sessions was you take a list sometimes of the best papers you've read, and you learn from them how they structured their table, etc. I think one of the papers I went through was I'm gonna send her a copy of the. I'll link it here. I'll find
Yes,
it and I'll
so
link it.
Philip's
So
particularly
it
interested
would
in
be a
burnout.
good.
I'm actually going to pull that out here because the nearest neighbor can be really helpful to you. And so, Philip, I know you looked at interventions to reduce burnout, and let's see if it'll probably come right up. No, maybe not. Which one was it, Philip?
I need to find it.
I thought it was in the Lancet. You looked for a nearest neighbor in doctors. Was it doctors, physicians?
Physician. I think it's by Prof. Colin West.
Here it is. I think it's this one. Yeah, West. So you can see this is a very highly cited paper. And let's see if this is open access. Okay, it's open access. You said this had a good summary table, Philip?
Yeah, because look, like how everything is structured in a way that if they're looking at things
Let's
at an
look at this in the
individual or
introduction.
structural
Let's
level.
look at this
Yeah.
in the introduction and see how they've structured it. Physical physician burnout, goes straight to the point, is at an epidemic level. All these bad consequences, and we need a more complete understanding to help fill gaps. Okay, so this is good. This is very clear. Like they're saying, this is epidemic levels that has all sorts of bad impacts on patient care, professionalism, safety, and so forth. More medical errors. Okay, we got to deal with the physician burnout, medical errors. And that says previous reviews have been limited, so it's already setting up the gap. Previous reviews have been limited, so therefore we did a systematic review. Medical literature, it can be very, very compressed here, like 2 paragraphs, but it got straight to the point. Here's this big issue, and what's the gap of the previous studies? Okay, but Philip, I want to look at the summary table because I think that's really a nice point. Let's see if we can find it. Here is a table. Let's see where their summary table is. It could be in their supplementary appendix. Let's take a look. Supplementary appendix. Here's their search strategy. Where did you see their summary? Here it is. Okay, great. And here you go. Burnout metric. Outcome assessment. Results. And this is very detailed. And again, you can look at the study and I can see exactly what they did, the intervention, details about the physician's outcome, the metric, and what the results were.
And it's not just that. They did the table, they put everything, and then at the end, they even divided the results in the sense that because 1, 2, 3, and 7, 8, 9 had this in common. They're not structured that they stayed. I think when you're going through the results actually on the paper, you can see what I mean. Like so that it's easier.
Yeah, and you mean in the description of the results itself.
They stay going through the table. They make a table of the table.
They make a table of the table. Yeah, so exactly. So you've got to have that base. Yeah, so they've got their Prisma essentially here, their study selection, and then they start saying, okay, all the randomized controlled trials did this, and report it kind of in a step-by-step way. Yeah, this is a nice paper, and having this nearest neighbor to yours will definitely help you write up yours and identify this paper cleared the bar for publication in a good journal. It's been cited thousands of times. They're doing something right. You want to try. People learn by imitating. You absolutely, there's nothing wrong with imitating the best in your field, and because that's going to be very likely to work for you as well. So good. Any questions about that? May, hey, good to see you jumping on as well. May, if you activate your camera, we can bring you on too. Because I want to cover a few others. I want to step back for a second because Conrad in the group got in touch, and he said he was having a lot of trouble with the search, and that he was going and searching databases and not finding anything relevant, and just thought Google Scholar was better. So the way this happened, Philip, you were on for part of the conversation when Conrad was with us. The first question I have for Conrad is, okay, Conrad, well, what's your Pico? And what's the Pico linking sentence? And Conrad said, I don't think I've made the Pico yet. So, well, Conrad, you haven't made your Pico. That's fundamental. You can't go search databases without the Pico. So what's your outcome that you're looking at? I said, I don't think I've defined that yet. I was just looking at financial text mining. And I said, well, yeah, but Conrad, if you just go look financial text mining, you're going to get a mountain of stuff. How are you going to know what you want, what you don't want, what's relevant, what's not? So you've got to have this Pico to give yourself some focus and precision, so you can look. There's a vast world of information. You need to be able to say something meaningful and useful about specific subsets of that information. So make sure you've got a Pico, and from that Pico, begin to identify keywords and nearest neighbor matches for those keywords to help you identify keyword variants. From this keyword variants, then you're going to look in some of the databases, likely some of those databases that some of your nearest neighbor matches have searched. By the way, if any of this language is unfamiliar, go check out our systematic review challenge, or just pop it here in the chat and ask me. I'm really happy to help with that. And yeah, so one thing, Philip, you'll remember, I asked Conrad too, is, okay, Conrad, what databases were you searching? He said, oh, I searched Taylor Francis and Springer. And I said, well, hang on, Conrad, wait a second. Taylor, that's a journal. That's not a database. So again, I think what Conrad was having some challenges with was not building up step-by-steps through the course and the sequence we've gone through. And if you don't do that, you're just setting yourself up for a world of frustration. And I think Joanne's going to have some frustration, because if one thing is off, that's going to carry through to the next stage of your analysis. So if that summary extraction table is not right, it's going to make it hard for you to see patterns in your results. It's going to make it hard to write up the results section. It's going to make it hard for you to stitch up your introduction to really emphasize what's important in your paper. And we've got a person in the group here saying the same thing. Without a Pico, there's no way to establish a keyword search cluster that can guide the search on a different database. So 100%, it's indispensable that you have that well-defined at the beginning before trying to go forward. And Phil, I think you'll remember when with us working through things, Pico was one of the first things we really struggled and spent a lot of time on to get right and defined.
Yes, and it was an issue. And then when we finally organized it and we started searching, we didn't find enough stuff just about doctors. We had to expand it all over the place.
Yeah. I want to add here, one person was commenting, and I just saw it now because I wasn't able to have multiple screens up. Would a table of gaps analysis be helpful in the journal where unclear want to guide the reader? It wouldn't necessarily be bad. I like if you can organize things into a table, it means that you have clarity and structure. So I like that. I would probably recommend saying, do a gap analysis yourself and understand what you're trying to plug, and then articulate that very simply and clearly in the methods, in the introduction, because that's really articulating what is the added value of your study. Why, and editors are going to look for that. Well, why do I want to print this study? Do we really need this study to be in the world? And high impact journals are going to want to have the most promising studies with the highest value added. So to really make the case for them, you need to say, look, this is an urgent conversation. If you could score a conversation on a scale of 1 to 10 and be in its urgency and importance, if you just say, well, exploring some factors that are linked to children's educational performance is important, that's different from saying, right, the early childhood educators are facing an epidemic of burnout. And this burnout is leading to children dropping out of school and failing grades and undermining their confidence, leading to long-term implications for society and additional educational costs. Well, that's taken me from, where this conversation's urgency was a 3 to this is a 7 or 8. Oh, wait, you're citing a stat like 70% of early childhood educators are leaving the field within 4 years. Wow, we spent all this money training them, and now they're getting burnt out. We need to do something about this. Okay, so you've established this is important. Then you say, well, previously we've done all these systematic reviews of high school teachers and university professors, but there actually isn't a systematic review of what's causing and can help prevent burnout in early childhood educators. Oh, well, this is an important paper that's going to plug that gap. That's the kind of argument you need to make to help give your paper the best chance at life in a high impact journal. Okay. So yeah,
something can I add? Oh, yeah. If someone was completely new to the field, how is there a resource for finding these resources, like a list of the PubMed, Web of Science, like etc., like all these search websites that is, or do you just buy from knowing?
Well, I think that's a good question. It can be hard to actually know what's the right database for you. If we take a concrete example, Philip, and even come to your paper on this, we might not have known at the outset what would have been a good paper. But if we went to your nearest neighbor, we can go in there, and you'll do this in the nearest neighbor match. Search for keyword variants. We searched these databases.
Mm-hmm.
This was done back in 2016, so it's justified then. And you see, they looked at burnout and stress. This was along with numerous other well-being terms. With Joanne's paper, I'm worried it's doing burnout and quality of life, but missing lots of other things. It has to be justified. But yeah, so if you don't know, which you might not know a priori, look in the methods. And now I have several databases that I'll probably want to make sure I search myself when doing my systematic review. So that's the best port of call.
Starting from the nearest neighbor method. Okay.
Yeah, the nearest neighbor method is really, really important. I think that makes sense. And somebody's saying here, exactly. Look, imagine you're giving in your introduction an elevator pitch about why this is so important. 100%. You are marketing your paper. Right? You're wanting to convince people to read it and see this research, and this is important for the world. So, glad you found that helpful. Again, the introduction is the toughest part to write, so I would really make sure the rest of your paper is rock solid before going there. That is when you often will have a clear sense of how to position your paper in the field when you finished everything. I see sometimes students really struggle trying to write their introduction first. Again, what we do in the fast track community is write our papers from the inside out, because that kind of logically follows what we're doing. We did our methods, we write our methods. We figured out our results and the main findings of our results, we write up the results. We see the gaps for research, we write up our conclusion, and then at the very end, we're going to stitch it all together with the introduction. Okay, great. May came through. So May, I said you wanted to lurk in the shadows. That's totally okay. And Conrad, do ask any questions if you have any. May saying, my question is, can we not just write the year's papers covering our writing, as I have two databases and I have two different beginning years? So well, I guess I'm trying to understand. So you're saying your databases have two different start years. I mean, the paper we just looked at, Philip's nearest neighbor, had from the inception of the database through to the time of search. So maybe you're saying the start of the database was at a different point, or did you choose a different year starting point? The general principle is you want to keep your search as consistent as possible across databases, as well harmonized. So you don't have to tie yourself in knots trying to explain, well, I looked from 1995 to 2015 in this database, and I looked from 2005 to 2013 in this database. It just looks kind of quirky. And why take
plus, it also makes sense if it starts from, for example, 1995. If something was discovered at that point in time, that anything that we learned was coming on from that point onwards. Like it's the time range.
Like,
it implies something, a time range.
Exactly.
That's what I'm trying to say.
There could be a really good point, Phil. There could be a really major event that happened. Something happened in 1995, and everything that came before that is irrelevant. Maybe the way early childhood educators were trained, there was a big world conference in 1994 after the tequila crisis in Mexico. I don't know, and they decided to train teachers in this new method to stop burnout. And we don't care about the past generations. We only care about the new. Okay, but you can justify that. That's a clean, coherent justification for why you chose 1995. But if not, it just raises an eyebrow. Was it there were just too many articles and you didn't want to go through them all? Was it? In any of those suggestions are not good. So yeah, somebody else said here to tie the change to a big change in government policy. Exactly. So you just want other people, you're making assumptions whenever you do a search saying, I'm only looking at these things. There are assumptions behind that. You want to make clear those assumptions so people don't think that you have some bias or some agenda that you're trying to drive that skewed the picture. You may be very passionate about your topic, and that's good. You just want to make sure that you've proven to everybody that that passion that you have isn't creeping in and infiltrating your analysis in some way that could distort the picture. We want to keep our science pure, from that kind of ideological pollution to the extent possible, if that makes sense. So really good. Okay, May, I hope that makes sense for you as well on the year issue. Again, by keeping it simple, you're gonna just make things so much easier for yourself down the road. Okay, Philip, just while we're here and have the opportunity, how are things progressing in your review as you're going along?
Things are going good. We something that might have been related to what Conrad was saying was going through because there I had to go through the learning process and go through everything, and I was like, okay, getting the search terms can be it can be an issue. Like it's a good thing to learn, and I don't know if we did like that was something that got strengthened. I don't know if there was issues from his side regarding that, because for example the good use of mesh terms and stuff like that you could use as a point, like because for example I didn't even know mesh terms exist. That saves a lot of work, like I don't know if but
yeah, so what we've got
we
from
can apply all
Conrad
that.
now is he wants to do a literature review on financial text mining, which is good, but do you want to do that you want to mine financial text for sentiment analysis because you think maybe sentiment analysis can better predict movements in the market? Or do you want text mining to detect fraud risk? Or do you want to say, look at new ways artificial intelligence or machine learning models are being used it's just not fully clear. And I think until you have that clarity, it's going to be really, really hard for you to move forward, and you run the risk of just running yourself in circles and getting frustrated. And someone else is saying, same here, it was all new, but worth learning. Look, a lot of you guys are doing this critical point in your careers where you've gone from ingesting information to now trying to produce new research on your own. And suddenly it feels like you've just been thrown off that cliche, thrown off the deep end of the swimming pool, and you got to figure it out. And there isn't a step-by-step guide. But fortunately, you guys are all benefiting from the training that we have here, where we have broken it down into simple bite-sized chunks. If you build up all these right steps, step by step, you'll end up with a really fantastic result, and it will stop you from racing ahead because we're able to say, hang on, wait a second, you got to get this step right before you go ahead and cause a world of frustration for yourself. May just came back. May says, thanks for the answer. I did not set the years limit, and I don't know from when years the paper started. If you didn't set, so that's really good. I'm glad you mentioned that, May. If you didn't set a year limit, you are starting from the inception of the database, whatever year that is. You don't necessarily need to document that then, just as long as you make it so that somebody can replicate your search. So if I don't set a limit in PubMed, it is from the very beginning of PubMed, which I could find out. I've actually never reported that, but I've gotten papers back from the 19th century in there before. So, which is actually kind of fun. Sometimes you get these historical nuggets that an old way of thinking about a classic perennial problem that I really like capturing some of those sometimes. But yeah, May, don't worry then too much about reporting that in that case, because everybody will be able to replicate
landmark paper.
Sorry, Philip?
No, because especially if it's a landmark paper, you have to mention it some way somehow. But in the 19th century, yeah, I think that's an issue. It's a bit too far away.
Yeah, well, I don't know. Maybe in yours, Philip, if physicians were still getting burnt out in the 19th century, who knows? Who knows? But I think you might want to look at modern.
Modern.
From the context of what you're doing, it could make sense to say I only want to look at after 1990, or maybe Philip, you want to look at papers that could look at. Yeah, I mean, you could even do in yours. Say, I think after European working time directives came into place that said, okay, doctors can't work more than these hours. Do we see a difference in the reports of the prevalence of burnout before and after that point? that could be something you could do with a systematic review.
Something we had at the start, like we had no idea what we're going into. They're like, okay, you have a contract A or contract B. So you choose to either work by European Work Time Directive or just completely ignore it, with no limit, And we went into that, and because that's what we're forced to, and they burnt us out.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah,
so.
I know there are other ways. There's the law in the books, and then of course what actually happens. I want to take another good question here, though. Do we need to establish a hypothesis for SLR paper? Yeah, I mean I like when you can. I like when you're asking a question that has a direction. So I definitely want you to have a research question. For example, I have some students who are working on, right, does participating in competitive sports increase the risk of eating disorders? And then as a sub question, is this worse in women than in men? So kind of a big research question and a second order question that the review can answer. Yeah, so that can be really good. I do like it. I mean, it is a research paper. So I do like if you can put that as clear a hypothesis as you can and try to avoid being just kind of exploratory where possible, because it's just much stronger. Usually exploratory, in my experience, doesn't have the same impact as if you think something is good or bad. You have a direction going in at the outset. And here's another one, another key question. Here, you may need to forget what you know and follow the system step by step, like as first I'm doing literature review. Yeah, I mean, I think, look, the system really works. A lot of students have a lot of success with it, and if you build it just step by step, you're going to make sure you've left no stone unturned, and you get to a good result. So do think about that. Again, yeah, I do see some students try to jump in with literature review and then try to pull in, dabble with different elements here and there, and they can get kind of frustrated. So that is definitely something I would encourage you to think about doing.
Your system is the nearest neighbor method of, it is the best the best neighbor method of what to do in terms of just try it out. Like,
It's gotten a lot of people have had fantastic success with it. Is it the only way? No, absolutely not. But it definitely makes it a lot easier for a lot of people. Nazia asks, what are the features of good writing? Yeah, Nazia, if you want to pop on your camera, happy to pull you on. I think it's a really good question. What are the features of writing a good qualitative literature review? So a systematic review, unless you're doing a meta-analysis, is qualitative in nature, because you're kind of doing a thematic analysis, you're summarizing the literature. Now, when you say qualitative literature review, I wonder if you're meaning that you're summarizing qualitative research. So I'm not really sure which you're trying to mean by that, but most systematic reviews, unless you're doing a meta-analysis, which I don't suggest you do until you've got really good quantitative skills, and it's just not strictly necessary for, I'd say, 99% of you in the group here, that I would stick with doing it in more qualitative nature, which is you're synthesizing the key themes. Now, you might have some quantitative insights in your results section saying, okay, 7 out of the 10 papers that I looked at on structural determinants of burnout found that these certain structures are really, really bad. You can do that quantitative summary, but in effect, a systematic review is more of a kind of qualitative research paper. You're not really going to be directly heavily quantifying things. So I think that's what you mean. But Nazia, to answer, if you are reviewing qualitative literature, it's the same principles. You need your summary table to describe who the interviews were with, and if they were semi-structured or if there was a structure, what were some of the key questions or outcomes that were asked about, and in your conclusions, you need to describe what those findings were. And the qualitative one, I recommend especially not having too many studies. I recommend you try to get that number down below 30 in your final set, about somewhere between 10 and 30, because they'll vary a lot more with each other, and so you might want to describe some of them one by one in more detail for each study. Not strictly necessary, but I think if you have 60 to 100 qualitative studies, you're going to have a very difficult time describing them all in your results section.
What's the minimum? What's a minimum number?
Minimum's tricky, but I mean, in the time of coronavirus, there were meta-analyses done on just 3 or 4 studies because that was the best available to try to establish guidelines. So it really depends on how hot and how young your field is. But in general, I think if you have fewer than 10, you're not really summarizing a body of literature. You just got a handful of studies, but that can also be okay. I mean, a conclusion that often comes from systematic reviews is that there is just a general lack of literature in this space, with that there's a lack of knowledge. That is a common conclusion. Okay, guys, we are right on time for an hour. Hope you found this helpful. And again, if you send me, I will give you completely unfiltered, honest, fierce, but loving advice on your papers as you go forward. We're going to conclude soon our systematic review series here for you and move towards exactly. Somebody has already said meta-analysis minimums 10 results, 10 studies. Yeah, there are different thresholds on that. Well, we're going to conclude this and move back into some more of the soft skills. So I'm going to be canvassing topics from all of you in the group, things that would be most helpful. Several of you have been asking me about some reading training to help you more effectively go through articles that some of you feel like you're losing so much time trying to wade through. We're going to do some more in presenting. We're going to go on effective writing. And if there's something you would really like me to cover, I will create a training that you'll find personally helpful because that will benefit the community. And we will schedule that for one of our Friday sessions. Again, thanks for everybody for joining us. Special thanks to Philip for being able to join us here in the studio. Philip, great to have you. Also,
Thank
May,
you. Thank you for the opportunity.
May, Nazia, Conrad, also for your great questions. That really helps us build the community. And again, we're aspiring here to be an open access community where I can take the insights that I passed on in the ivory tower at Harvard, Oxford, and Cambridge and bring them to you all over the world, open access, 100% free. Those of you who do want to work together in a closer, more advanced one-to-one way, I have limited slots for students. So get in touch and we can set up a meeting, see if you could be a good fit. But that's it. Everybody have a great weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you same time, same place next week. Bye, everyone, for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor.